Learning to properly scale your 3D printed armor pieces before you print them can be one of the hardest parts of a build. A lot of the times you can get away with things like helmets because, hey, if they're too big, they still look pretty good. And if they're too small, you still have a pretty cool display piece for the shelf. But nobody wants to go through all the trial and error of printing out an entire cosplay costume to just not have it fit in the end. And even worse, printing out giant pieces that just aren't gonna fit you because you scaled them wrong. So in this video, I wanna show you guys an awesome program that's gonna help you get a way better fit on your armor and cosplay. Let's take a look. So I want to introduce you guys to a really cool program called Armorsmith. Now, a lot of you guys have probably already heard it mentioned across my channel. I talk about it in this tutorial on how to scale 3D printed armor, but this video up here is more of a general video on multiple ways to scale armor, but this is probably one of the best ways to do it. Now, Armorsmith is not a free program. It costs 40 smackaroos. So you're gonna have to put some money into the program to get some stuff back. Now ask yourself, is this program worth 2 rolls of filament? Or hey, how about you ask me, hey Frank, will this program potentially save me at least 2 rolls of wasted filament in scaling my cosplay and having things not fit? Yes, it absolutely will, because once you pay the $40, you don't just have to use it on one project. You can use it on another project and however long you want to use it. So yes, it will absolutely pay for itself very, very quickly. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and go over all of the system requirements. They list it right out here in the FAQ, exactly what you need to the bare minimum to run this program on your computer. Cool, awesome, you've gone and paid for the program and downloaded it. But before we get into actually scaling and measuring your own body for the program, I do need to preface this entire video with something. This is not a one-size-fits-all, 100% guaranteed perfect armor every time video. That's just not how humans are made. Every human is shaped differently. Even twins are shaped a little bit differently just due to their diets. So when taking your measurements, when doing your calculations, when putting it into the program, you're gonna be shaped a little bit different than the other guy you saw in the armor you're trying to build. This is a tool in a toolbox. This is not the end all be all answer to every scaling issue you're ever going to have. This is just to help you save filament, save time, and get a better fit on your costumes and projects. So with that said, I will get off of that soapbox and we will take a look at the program. Hey, isn't this cool? This is Armorsmith. That's gonna be you. That's gonna be your 3D avatar. And you know what? The very first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go right up here to that view, and I'm gonna change the background. I'm just gonna change it into a plain background. That's it. Welcome to the void. I think Kyle Hill is here somewhere. Now, before clicking anything, I just want to go through some of the buttons and drop-down menus and what you're actually looking at here. Now, you can do a lot with importing and exporting your workspaces, saving as. You can save the actual project so you can have different clusters of armor, but the most important thing is saving your avatar. Make sure after the first part of this video, when we measure and get your measurements put in there, save your avatar. Don't do what I did and spend hours measuring yourself to just close out the program and lose all of your progress. Don't do it. Everything's pretty self-explanatory. You have your avatar over here, so we can edit the measurements or we can edit the pose. And the differences here are if I say I click the bicep, we have the measurements and we get a couple different things to move around here. We have the length of his bicep, which we can change. If you change left, you'll change right. So you can stretch that out. You can change the entire circumference of the bicep, or you can skew it in and out, ununiformly or non-uniformly. This way, you can make it a little flat. Nobody's arm is, perfectly round like that. I don't think everybody looks like Popeye. So this is gonna let you go around and just change the measurements. But say you want the avatar in a different pose. Well, you can change the pose too. So now if I click that spot, I have a whole rotation plane. Hey, can't do that. That's kind of gross. But this will let you edit the actual pose of the avatar, which is gonna come in handy later when we're looking at collision points for the armor. Now you can position this however you want, but honestly, if you go to avatar and you go to change pose, there's the standard T pose, and then there's the standard relax pose. I actually like the relax pose a lot more just for the sake of getting the armor attached. And then once you attach the armor, you can go and edit the pose and the armor will move with the avatar as long as you attach it to the right points. You can also save and load your own custom poses. So if you want to make your avatar sitting or doing a kung fu kick or punching, you can go and save the avatar into that state and then just reload it whenever you want. So now again, without touching anything, without selecting or highlighting anything, you can see there's a whole menu down here of just the properties of your avatar. Now you can name it. We'll call this one Ugly McWeird because oh, it's gonna get weird. You can even change the opacity of the avatar itself, which I really wouldn't do that. But changing the opacity of the costume, this is gonna come in handy later when we're actually dropping pieces onto the avatar. Show costume textures, that's totally up to you, but if you're doing 3D printing, you're not gonna be really worrying about textures because you don't print the textures anyway, so don't even worry about that. You can also change the gender from male to female, and it only changes 2 settings down below. So we'll skip a little bit ahead. If you leave it in male, you're going to get chest, circumference, width, depth. You're gonna get those 3 settings, but if you change it to female, it'll actually give you a couple extra settings to actually mess with. So you'll lose the chest measurements and it'll change it over to bust and under bust to help you kind of adjust those parameters as you see fit. And then you have all of your measurements: head height, neck, back, shoulders, sleeve. You have every possible measurement you can think of. It's not only the dimensions and circumference of your thigh, it's the length of your thigh, it's the distance between your hip and your kneecap. So there's tons of different measurements you're going to need to get, and this is the most crucial part of this entire process. The more time you put into adjusting your avatar now, theoretically, unless you go on some crazy diet or really start hitting the gym or let yourself go, you're never really gonna need to mess with this ever again. So put in the time to get the measurements right, at least the lengths. You're not gonna shrink or get taller or thinner, even though your waist, McDonald's is pretty good, and sometimes, your waist can get a little bit big. I'm not judging, I do it too. Now you can go in there and type every little measurement you want and adjust everything, or you can kind of grab it and freehand it. You can change, I'm like an 11.5 foot shoe size, so we can put that there. We can change the actual dimensions of the feet. Wow, somebody must have stepped on some glass. That they should get that looked at. Okay, quick side note number 2. These are gonna keep happening, but definitely pay attention. Now, when taking your measurements, which measurements are you taking and how tight do you want this armor to be? This is absolutely something you need to consider when adjusting for your armor in cosplay. Let's just take my arm here as an example. Oh, also, get yourselves a really cool tailor measuring tape thing. This thing's awesome for measuring circumferences and diameters and all of that, because it just tightens up and then boom, you undo it, and then I know that my forearm right there is 11 inches a circumference around. You get it. Anyway, you're gonna take something like this and then you're gonna put it around your arm, right? Okay, now I'm gonna take that measurement because that's what it looks like on my avatar, right? And then I'm gonna suck that up there and then I'm gonna pop that off. Okay, 13 inches. Well, then I would translate that to the avatar, 13 inches. But what happens when I close my arm? What happens when I flex or make a muscle or try to bring my arm up? Well, even without flexing, even without trying to be all ripped and jacked on camera, let me just lift my arm up. Well, now it's 14, and I'm not even like flexing or squeezing into an armor. So what measurement should I theoretically put there? Well, I would put your most flexed out measurement there. However big you can make that muscle group, that's what you should put there, because if you don't, when you go to print that armor, if I was to slide a bicep part over my arm that was only 13 inches, anytime I would try to close my arm, the skin and muscle and tissue would have nowhere to go. That's gonna get very tight and very uncomfortable very quickly. So definitely take that into consideration when you're measuring yourself. Not only that, but clothing. Are you gonna be wearing stuff under this? Do I want that bicep part or that forearm part squeezing my skin all of the time? No, I'm gonna wanna add some wires or maybe some foam, or maybe I'm gonna have an undersuit on underneath it. So what I would very much suggest doing is when you're doing your measurements, wear clothes. I know that seems very counterintuitive. Wear some thicker jeans or some thicker sweatpants. Wear a sweatshirt or a hoodie. Wear something that's gonna give you just a little bit more bulk, not too much. Don't put on a winter coat or anything, but take that in consideration when you're measuring yourself. Are you gonna have a bunch of electronics in your hand? Are you gonna have a bunch of electronics going down your chest or back? Really think about what's gonna be inside the suit when you're scaling and measuring this stuff. Now, for the sake of time on this tutorial, I'm not gonna go over every parameter. I'm not gonna go over every area you need to measure. You guys kind of hopefully get that at this point. click apart, see what the lengths and the differences are, have somebody help you measure, get those perfect points and adjust them, and just make your avatar as close to you as possible. Hey, it's me again, Frank in the suit. So we've talked about the program now, and you guys better understand, how to make your 3D avatar, the different measurements you're gonna need to do, and just the variance in actually getting those measurements. Now, something should be painfully clear to a lot of you by now. The armors and costumes we're going to be making are going to be shaped drastically differently, and I have two perfect examples right here. I'm currently wearing my Mark 85 Iron Man suit, and this is an organic Iron Man suit. And what I mean by that is it shouldn't actually exist. If you're familiar with the Iron Man movies, most of his suits are mechanical. They are actual suits he can step into and wear and exist in a physical plane. Well, suits like this, the Mark 50, the Mark 85, even the Iron Spider suit are nanotech armors. Even new suits like the Blue Beetle suit that's coming out for, DC, these suits don't really exist. They operate more like fabrics or elastic materials. One of the best examples I've ever seen of this is in Endgame, where Tony goes to hug Peter Parker, and you can see the whole back of Tony's suit just stretch in impossible ways. That's supposed to be metal. Metal doesn't do that. Now, let's compare that to something like a physical mechanical suit like the Mark 39. This is a suit that theoretically, in the reality that this suit existed in, actually existed. It had a physical form. Now, they didn't build a model of this for the movie. It was one of the many Iron Legion suits that flew in and swooped in at the end, but this was a real suit that had actual physicality in that universe. Suits like this leave a lot more open to the imagination on being able to hide certain things, getting the joints to overlap and move and actually look pretty good when they're moving around, as opposed to a nanotech suit that operates more like a Spider-Man fabric. Now, on the surface, this might sound really stupid to consider, but when you're trying to bring these CGI and mythical suits into reality, you need to start thinking about these things. Now, combine all of that into the fact that we're all different shapes and sizes. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you work out nonstop 10 days a week and you'll be able to get buff and ripped like Chris Evans. Sometimes the genetics just don't allow you to do that. So all I'm asking of you is to please take your time in this step, get the best measurements you possibly can, and as you learn how to fit the armor to the avatar and really look at how things are fitting, really slow down and see if this is the best possible armor for you. But hopefully the next part of this video will help you guys get even closer to that end goal and getting you into your own armors and suits. Because I'll tell you what, guys, just standing here in half of Star Boost, this feels so cool, and it is so worth the headache and trial and error that went into it. I've worn some suits and tuxedos, but nothing's cooler than wearing an Iron Man suit, and anybody can fight me on that. This is amazing. Let's get back to it. Okay, so now it's time to get into it. You've measured your avatar, you've adjusted everything, you realized, wow, I should probably lay off the Taco Bell, but it's so good, I won't judge you at all, I promise. Anyway, let's start getting some armor into it and fit to the body. Now, why not just do an armor you guys are all pretty much all familiar with this at this point? My Mark 85 by DO3D. First up, let's start easy and small with the bicep to the forearm. So I want that forearm to fit, and you're gonna go and select it. And it's super easy to load parts into it now. You literally just drag and drop them over and it'll import and load, which is just fantastic. And now I have two of them, so let's get rid of one of those. Anyway, you're gonna select the part you want, and then you're gonna select attach. And then it's going to give you all of these awesome attachment points all over the body. Well, you can attach it to the abs or the groin or the thigh. Well, this is a forearm, so I'm going to attach it dead center in the forearm. Now, we have to get this positioned properly. Right off the bat, I'm going to do three things, okay? First off, I want to change the opacity of the forearm. I can go down here now, and you see opacity, and I'm going to change that to 0.5. Now I can see through it just a little, and that's going to help me start lining everything up. The other things I'm going to do is I'm going to click the forearm, and I'm going to change the color of the skin. For some reason, I like yellow because it seems to just show better through the armor pieces, because now I can see the exact dimensions of the forearm. You can do this across the entire avatar, whatever color works for you. I just like yellow. And next, this is totally optional, change the color of the part itself. You can make it red because this is Iron Man, but make sure it contrasts well with the part that the color that's going to be behind it. Honestly, I don't like it against the yellow, so for now I'm going to leave it in this grayscale. And it's going to be very easy to manipulate and move this part around. Now, there are some buttons up top for translating or rotating. You can also right click it and it gives you a ton of different options. You can show and hide the avatar. You can show and hide the attachment points. You can unhide or hide all of the parts you aren't currently touching. This is gonna be important when you load multiple armor pieces and your computer starts losing its mind. But you can translate the part, and translating is what's gonna let you move the part left and right, forward and back. You can rotate the part, which is exactly what we wanna do now, and that's gonna rotate the part into position. So we're gonna move this around until we feel like it fits in the proper spot, and try to just get that lined up as nicely as possible. And you're gonna jump back and forth between translate and rotate, get it aligned up perfectly. We're not doing any scaling yet. We're just trying to get it nice and centered and aligned with the forearm. There are 3 hotkeys that will also speed this up. T for translate, R for rotate, and an S for scale. Guess what? Just go through them until you get translate and rotate, and it just makes it easier. So I arguably have this lined up pretty well, but you can already see just how much it's clipping through the armor. Now what I could go and do is delete the opacity again and go back up to 100%, and then change the color back to something drastic like red. And now I can clear as day see where my forearm is clipping through the part. Will this fit me? Maybe. Do I want to risk it? Maybe not. I might be able to move it forward a little bit more just to squeeze a little bit out of it, but you can still see it's probably going to be kind of a tight fit, and that's not something we want. There are 2 types of scaling. First one is uniform scaling. That is going to make an object bigger or smaller equally. So let's take, I don't know, this tape measure. If I wanted to scale this up, I would just move it closer to the camera. Everything proportionally is getting bigger as I'm moving it to the camera, right? That's basically uniform scaling. Bigger, smaller, none of the dimensions of the thing change proportional to the thing itself. Now, non-uniform scaling is where your X, Y, and Z coordinates all change differently. So like I was saying before, I can make this part bigger or smaller just by grabbing it, and everything's gonna move proportionally. The part will get bigger in just one grand scheme percentage. You can go over to the side and actually enter a percentage you think you want to increase it to. So if I wanna make this 120, it drags everything else up with it. You can also come over here and hit S, and it'll give you a box that you can drag and move around. That's gonna do exactly the same thing. So if I wanna make it huge, now we're at 135%. If I wanna make it a lot smaller, now we're at 78%. And Control Z goes back and forth to help you out. Now, I know I just said there's 2 types of scaling, but Armorsmith gives you a couple different options. And 2 of those options are pretty much the same thing. We have non-uniform and free-form deformation. They're more or less the same thing, just the free-form gives you even more options. Now, non-uniform, now I can scale the X, Y, and Z in different directions. So if I just want to make the forearm longer without adjusting how wide or thick it is, now I can do that. I can make it cover more or less of my arm by dragging it up and down. And honestly, I think I do want to shrink it a little bit. I think it was a little bit too long for my forearm. That's not bad at all. But now I want to make the forearm just a little bit wider, so now I can grab the X or Y, and then I can make the part just a little bit thicker or wider wherever I see fit. And having the opacity changed back to solid definitely helps me eliminate those yellow parts that were clipping through the armor. And now we can go even one step beyond that. It's still non-uniform scaling, but it's called free-form deformation. And this lets you just drag and manipulate even more parts of the part that let you just fit it better. So now it's gonna lock your part in a box, and depending on the angle or the area you grab, you can now warp the part in just different ways that you weren't able to before. So now I can make the top of the forearm a little bit wider than it was before, without affecting the bottom part of it or without affecting other dimensions or parameters of it. You can click entire planes and drag out just one side of it without warping the other side. Now, this can get very complicated and very tricky very quickly. So definitely only use this if you really are trying to form something perfectly to your body or just get something just tweaked in and dialed in a little bit more. And once you're happy with that model and how it's scaled and fit, you just right click it, hit export model, and then you can save that scaled and manipulated part. This way you can drop it into another program and 3D print it. Okay, so we've talked about the very basic part of scaling a piece around you after you've measured your avatar. Now let's talk about larger parts. What if I want to scale a back plate and a chest to my body in one go? How would I use the program to do that? Well, let's take a look. Okay, so I just went and dropped in the chest and the collar and the back plate of the Mark 85, and I got them to line up decently well. But if I'm being honest, that kind of sucked. Having parts that need to fit together perfectly is gonna be the worst part of scaling an armor. Now, if I'm building something like a suit, I don't care what the scale of the forearm is when I'm scaling the chest. They don't have anything to do with each other. The only things I need to worry about when scaling the forearm is maybe the scale of the bicep, so they lock into place properly, right? And we haven't even started talking about collision points yet, but don't worry. This is easy to scale up and down, but when I go to start scaling the chest and the collar up, I need to make sure I'm scaling them perfectly in line with the back, because those parts that line up on the side, if I skew and mess up the collar too much, if I scale it up 110%, but I don't scale the back properly, things are gonna start to collide or not line up or just literally just be impossible to fit because I didn't scale them together. Now you can attach these parts together in Armorsmith. It's a little tricky to do, and you need to make sure they're all attached to the same point. So if I attach the back to the back pivot point and the chest to the front chest part, I can't combine them together. I won't be able to right click and group them together. But what if we dropped them in MeshMixer and did that anyway? Go ahead and open up MeshMixer. This is just a good skill to have, period, if you're doing any armor builds, cosplay, 3D printing, whatever. You're gonna go ahead and drop in your part. So here's the same back plate, and then I'm gonna drag and drop in my next part, the collar. Hit append, and I don't know why, but just hit no. If it pops up and asks you this auto position, just hit no. Most 3D armor builders are gonna have their 3D telemetry saved into the files, the actual position of when they modeled and exported the file in relation to the other part. So it actually just auto-aligned the collar to the back, exactly where I need it to be. So now I can hold shift, click both of them, hit combine, and now we have one solid part. Now let's go ahead and drop in the chest and do the same thing. Combine them all together, and now I have the back, collar, and chest all perfectly aligned and locked together. Now I can scale everything uniformly, non-uniformly, freeform, whatever, and they will always line up perfectly when I export them. So let's just go and export this. Mark 85 torso, I spelled that wrong, don't judge. And now I have one full armor piece I can drop back into Armorsmith and manipulate and scale and size and get to fit properly without having to mess with any of the perfect alignment or collision points that otherwise would have just drove me nuts in scaling each individual part. Now, just for fun, I'm gonna show you what you would do next once you manipulated this solid part and basically how to break it back into the other pieces. We're gonna scale this thing super weird. Obviously, I'm not scaling it to the avatar, but we're gonna make it just this weird oblong thing that really would have been a nightmare to try to figure out by itself. Yeah, that looks about right. We've obviously adjusted the scale just a little bit. So now we're gonna go and export this newly modified and scaled part and then drop it back in the MeshMixer. So now we have this oblong, weirdly shaped Mark 85 chest piece, and we go select it, hit edit, and hit separate shells. It'll break it back down into its 3 original components. Ha! It actually broke it into a couple other pieces. This file just has extra bits like the light covers. We don't need those, and I don't even know what those are. More light covers, more light covers. That's part of the arc reactor. That's part of that. That's part of the arc reactor. And here are the original 3 parts. We now have the chest that is scaled in a way that it would have been almost impossible to scale this as perfectly and uniformly to the collar part with everything still aligning. And the same goes for the collar and the chest. And now I can just select these parts, go over to export, and export each individual part ready for 3D printing, and I can move on. Being able to go back and forth between something like MeshMixer and Armorsmith, or whatever 3D modeling program you want to use. You can do very similar stuff in Blender or wherever you want to work, but it just unlocks so many more options on being able to properly align and fit armor parts. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next part of showing you guys just little things in this program. But by this point, if you have too many parts loaded in Armorsmith, your computer might be chugging along. I have a pretty powerful computer, and having this many polygons and shapes loaded all at once can really put a burden on it. And I'm screen recording, and I'm recording in 4K. So my computer is really losing its mind right now. So what you can do is you can start eliminating parts you don't need to actually have shown right now. I don't need the chest to be visible if I'm going to be working on the forearm and the bicep. So I can click on the chest and I can actually just hide that entire part. The same goes for the shoulder. I only want to deal with the forearm and the bicep right now, so I can hop over here and then also just hide the shoulder. And then when the time comes, I can just right click on any of the other parts and select unhide all, and everything will just pop back into an existence. But now I want to start talking about the collision points. We've been measuring and scaling and moving the parts around our body, but now we need to start considering how is our body going to be moving inside the parts. If you go back up to Avatar and you select Edit Pose, this will unlock the next part of what we're going to be talking about, actually moving everything around. So now what I can do is I can start moving parts of the armor around, or well, parts of the avatar around, to seeing how everything's going to pinch and intersect. So I can hop over here to the forearm and I can grab the elbow joint and I can start rotating the parts around. And you can already see where there's going to be a massive problem with the forearm just slamming into the bicep. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier with an organic suit versus a mechanical suit. These are all things to consider. But the reality of it is that's not quite how the joint works out. This is the exact bicep and forearm I have loaded in Armorsmith. And when I rotate my arm, well, the back cover just opens up. It's actually creating a gap in the whole system for the armor to flex and move around. Armorsmith isn't able to perfectly replicate this because it can't detect its own collisions. There is actually a hard pinch point here, and the forearm just moves around. The forearm is just sliding down, the biceps sliding up my arm a little bit, and the forearm is just sliding down ever so slightly as everything moves and just rotates around itself. So this falls into another layer of really considering how things are going to fit together when scaling. Yes, that looks like a really bad collision point, but if I scale them the right way, I should still have enough freedom of movement to be able to actually move in the armor. Also, if you want a better look on what's going on the inside of a part without having to change the opacity like we did way earlier, you can right click on the part and go to quick clip planes. God, I have trouble saying that. And you can either do quick or select a specific axis, but usually it's pretty good at figuring out which one you want. Now I have this plane that I can manipulate up and down. I can literally translate it the same way I manipulate the armor part, and I can actually just kind of almost do like an x-ray view through the entire part. You know, see, oh, it might be a little bit too close in that one spot. I might want to maneuver it in a different way. So it just lets you kind of, it's like a live plane cut just to show you what's going on inside the part. And it can really help you dial in that perfect fitment. So definitely don't sleep on some of the hidden little features that are in Armorsmith to just get a better view at the part. So I think that's pretty much going to do it for this video, guys. I could sit here all day and show you how to measure each specific part of your body and then import every single type of armor and drag it and drop it. But it's really just going to be repetitive at that point. Armorsmith is a program you definitely need to just play around with because everybody's going to have a different experience with it. Between the different body shapes and sizes, between the different types of armor and cosplay you want to actually build and construct, and just the different ways people are going to want to print and make their armor fit. There's just too many variables in it for there to be a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter tutorial. But hopefully now coming out the other end of this tutorial, you have a better understanding of Armorsmith and the benefits it offers to a full-scale build like this. And you guys know, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them down below. I do my best to respond to as many as possible, but I do read them all. But that's gonna do it for this video, guys. As always, thank you so much for watching. You have a good day.